I'm thinking Nancy's going to be checking in momentarily, so she will provide some introductory comments.
Hi, everybody. Sorry to keep you waiting. Hi, Nancy. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Are we all set to start, David?
I believe so. I put screen share for all participants, so you should be able to screen share.
Okay, great. Okay. I'll get this going quickly so everyone can, we can get through this as quick as possible. I know everybody's really busy. I'm just going to go to my next slide. So thank you all for joining us for this SAS final exam invigilator training session. This session will provide you with an overview of Lakehead University's final exam regulations. In addition to this, you'll also have an opportunity to become familiar with your invigilation schedule, the SAS exam information sheet, and the SAS exam room. I've got a few housekeeping notes before we start. Today's session, we're going to be recording it for your convenience. There's also closed captioning available for you to access it if you require it. And during the session, feel free to ask questions. Please add your questions or comments to this chat and we'll monitor and share with everyone. So please feel free to do that. So I just wanted to share with you a quick agenda. Today, we're going to start with a land acknowledgement. Then we're going to have a welcome from myself, from me, and then we're going to go over some final exam regulations with Nikki Maronese from Enrollment Services. And then David is going to share some SAS final exam processes with everybody as well. So just to get started, we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. So Lakehead University respectfully acknowledges its campuses are located on the traditional lands of Indigenous people. Lakehead Thunder Bay is located on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. Lakehead Aurelia is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Lakehead University acknowledges the history that many nations hold in the areas around our campuses and is committed to a relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. So I want to welcome everybody today to our new invigilators and our returning SAS invigilators. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for this final exam invigilator training session. As everybody, you all know, I'm Nancy Cahill. I'm the manager of Student Accessibility Services. I should have introduced myself at the beginning, but I feel you all know me. And today I'm going to provide you with a very brief intro to SAS, to Student Accessibility Services, or SAS. And I will say that I'll use SAS for the presentation to represent Student Accessibility Services. I'm going to give you a brief intro of SAS, the students we support, confidentiality, and services related to exam accommodations. So as you know, Student Accessibility Services arranges academic accommodations for students with disabilities or medical conditions. All of our services are confidential and provided on an individual basis. Academic accommodations are arranged to reduce barriers that a student may encounter in their education, and all of these accommodations are individualized and put in place to support functional limitations that the students may be experiencing. And specifically, in relation to the presentation we're doing today, we're talking about accommodations for final exams. And so some examples of academic accommodations for assessments may be accommodations like a distraction-reduced environment, disability-related breaks, additional time, assistive software, supportive chairs, or adjustable desks. And all of these accommodations help to reduce the barriers that a student may experience when they are writing an exam. For example, a student may have a disability-related break to utilize to say monitor their blood sugar level if they're a student with diabetes. They may be utilizing disability-related breaks to utilize strategies that they've been working on with their therapist to be able to reduce the functional limitations they're experiencing at the time due to the intense stress that they're under during exams. So all of these accommodations have a specific purpose and they're individualized for the students. So now you may be wondering, a lot of the students registered with our office, you may be wondering, like, what does a student with a disability look like? And it's surprising to note that most of the students that register with our office have a non-visible disability or medical condition. In fact, in 2021-22, 95% of students registered with our office had a non-visible disability. And if you take a moment to stop right now and think about what might be a non-visible disability and what that might look like for who a student may look like, and thinking about that, sometimes disabilities are permanent or temporary, but thinking, take a minute in your mind to think about some of those non-visible disabilities. And there's a vast list of disabilities, invisible disabilities that students experience or individuals experience. All of us do at one time or another. There's things like learning disabilities or acquired brain injuries, ADHD, Crohn's disease, diabetes, all of these things, all of these disabilities or medical conditions, they impact individuals in different ways. And the complexity of these disabilities can range from one individual to another. And that's what it's important for us, the supports that we can put in place for them to reduce some of these, the barriers that they experience from these disabilities. As I mentioned, the complexity of a disability, can vary greatly from one student to another. Sometimes conditions are unstable, unpredictable, and episodic. And there may be impacts from medication or other issues related to their disability. And students may have multiple disabilities. And as an invigilator in, working for student accessibility services, you may be, or maybe aware that some students are having different difficulties during their exams. And we want you to know that, Student Accessibility Services is here to help support any kinds of concerns or questions raised by students about their accommodations or their disability. We want you to know that there will be SAS staff available to help you with that and support the students and support you in your role as a SAS exam invigilator. So along with the complexity, confidentiality is really important as well when we're thinking about supporting our students with medical conditions or disabilities. All of the contact with SAS for student contact is confidential, and their disability related information is held in confidence in SAS. And any kind of disability related information concerning a student that you may be proctoring should not be disclosed or discussed. David's going to go over the approved academic accommodation forms, and he has a list of all of the accommodations that are approved, and he'll be chatting with you about that to know what to expect. And I know, it's just important that, student names or accommodation times, none of that information should be shared with the whole group. There's ways that you can share that information with the individual students when you're proctoring them. And we are going to talk more about that during our presentation. So just keeping in mind confidentiality and privacy for our students who are writing with us. And once again, any questions or concerns raised by students regarding their accommodations, we encourage you, they need to be discussed with an SAS accessibility advisor or myself. And we do have our main phone here in our office, and you will be sharing our SAS hotline number with you. We'll have a staff available to support you as an invigilator at any time during the final exam period. So like, I just wanted to share a little bit of information about that with everybody, and I'm going to now pass it over to Nikki Maronese with the final exam regulation part of the presentation. And there's Nikki's presentation. So I'll pass it over to Nikki if you're ready, Nikki.
I'm all set. Thanks, Nancy. So hello, everybody. My name is Nikki Maronese. I'm the schedule and exam coordinator for Lakehead University. So I'm going to just go a little bit over some exam invigilation kind of responsibilities, what the regulations say. So I don't touch upon the SAS side. This would be for just the actual proctoring of a exam. It just happens that you'll be proctoring SAS exams, and David will be going through more details on the SAS side of managing exams. This is just purely on the invigilation of an exam. So let's see here. There we go. So for exam regulations, we're just going to go kind of through the rights and responsibility as a student while writing their exam. And then there'll be some things that I'll talk about what we do before, during, and after an exam. When we have exams, you have your own exam center, but sometimes you use general classrooms. You might often use the Senate chambers, but we always want to make sure that you choose an area by the entrance to have students place their cell phones, purses, backpacks, hats, coats, should be placed in a designated area. Coats and hats cannot be worn during the examination, with the exceptions for cultural garments, or if there's an SAS approved accommodation for the students, which would be noted on the form. So we want everything, basically, if it doesn't have anything to do with the exam, it shouldn't be with the students. So we also do not want them to hang their coats on the back of their chairs, or place their bags at their feet or anything like that. So a table or an area, if you're using a classroom or a Senate chamber, should be designated as where these items should be going. Ideally, they would be in a place where you can still see them. So not moving a table into the hallway for all their stuff to be. It should still be within the room or within your site, but just away from the students. Food and drinks are not permitted in the exam room unless noted. So anything to do with an SAS accommodation will trump the regulation. The only drink they're allowed in the examination room, regardless of their accommodations, is water in clear unlabeled bottles. So we're watching that even if they have, like, say, a bottle they got out of the vending machine, that we peel the label off of it. So years past is that we found that students would take the labels off, write things on, and then re-seal the bottles with their prints so they could kind of read through it. So always clear unlabeled bottles should be the ones that they have for water. The exception would be is, say a student brought, and I'll see if you can see mine. So my water bottle is black, it is not clear, you cannot see through it. Is that I know we've had kind of a compromise as that bottle stays, say, towards the proctor themselves. And if a student needs a, you know, because they're gonna need water. 3 hours of writing an exam in, you know, like in university's recycled air, they're gonna probably want something to drink. So they can put their hand up, come and get a drink out of their own water bottle, and then they go back. So there's a bit of a compromise that we have found with the water bottles, because so many people carry around now, like metal ones that are not clear, is that's kind of our compromise for them. So all electronic devices should be turned off and placed in the designated area. Cell phones shouldn't be anywhere on the student. So you can, there's a little script you can read that their cell phones, their smartwatches, anything that's electronic should not be left on their body. And students will forget, because you'll say, you know, all electronic devices should be left at the front with your bags or your books or your backpacks. But a lot of, and that triggers the cell phone a lot of times, but they'll forget about their smartwatches, or they'll forget about their pods in their ears, that sort of thing. So just making sure that as you kind of start to get the room settled, that you're watching their wrists, their ears, and making sure their cell phones aren't with them. Ideally, they're off and completely away from the student, because that also makes sure that we don't come across any situations where oh, but your cell phone was on you and I swear I saw you using it kind of stuff. Is that it's best for students to leave anything that could be considered a way of cheating with their bags and their books. There's always going to be a minimum of 1 seat between each student. And when you manage the SAS exams, it's a little easier because often they're writing different exams. But if you can spread out the students who are writing the same exam, so if you have, say, 5 students writing a certain nursing exam, that you keep them apart. Their Lakehead University student ID must be face up on the exam desk. And David will go through your procedure of what to do if they don't have their LUID with them. And really, once they sit down, all they should have on the desk is the things that they need to write the exam. So their LUID card, any of their writing utensils, anything that the professor has indicated they are permitted to have. So if they're permitted to have a calculator, if they're permitted to have a cheat sheet, if they're permitted to have a textbook, any of those things would be on, professors should be writing them on their cover sheet of what they're permitted to have. Any form of communication with students is not permitted in any way. Students are expected to stop and start writing their exam when you tell them. So as they enter the room, one of the most often cued things is to make sure they understand that the exam might be on the desk with them, is to keep it face down, don't touch it, don't do anything until we tell you to do so. So unless specifically stated by the professor on the exam paper or previously approved by the instructor or respected invigilator, books, notes, headphones, calculators, any kind of electronic listening, viewing, data capability device must be left in the designated area. It is part of the script that we read to the students, but if students have any questions, any need for additional booklets, need to use the washroom, they should be raising their hand first, and then they wait for the invigilator to come to them. They shouldn't be getting up and coming to the invigilator. At the conclusion of the exam, whenever the students are done, they should be prompted, and as part of the script, to leave with the least distraction to the students still writing. And they're not permitted to congregate outside the exam room following the exam. It's not as common with SAS exams as students have a variety of accommodations, and within one room you will often have a variety of exams being written. It's something we see more, you know, say like a 200-person biology exam as they start to hang out in the hallways waiting for their friends. And then they start to talk about the exam when they get there. So one of the things that we do ask all proctors to do is if they do hear some rumblings in the hallway, is to just, you know, open the door and ask whoever's hanging out right outside the exam room to move along the hallway just to someplace quieter so that they don't disturb. So students are responsible to ensure the exam and all papers, booklets, and any unused booklets are submitted to the instructor and the invigilator. Students are not permitted to leave the exam within the first hour of the full examination. So what that means is if an exam is scheduled to start at 9 a.m., no student, whether they're with SAS or writing with the rest of the class, is permitted to leave within the first hour. And that is because we also allow students to arrive up to 1 hour late. So we're trying to make sure that there's no overlap. So if student Johnny is done within half an hour and he leaves, but Susie has not actually gotten to the exam yet, Johnny can tell Susie what's on the exam. So the first hour, no matter if they're done or not, they are not permitted to leave. The tricky part, and David will speak a little bit more about this, is the students who have extra time in the evening because their exam starts earlier. So they might start at 5 or 4 or 3:30, is that the actual exam being written is still starting at 6. So officially those students should not be allowed to leave until 7. So David will speak a little bit more of that, but we do want to watch that students are not being permitted to leave the exam completely within the first hour. When they are done, they should be providing you with everything that has to do with the exam. So they need to provide you with the exam material, any unused books, before they retrieve their personal belongings. There is no real official end of an exam as much in the SAS as there is, say, in the field house or when we write in classrooms. So we write in a classroom, the exam is 9 to 11, firmly on the dot, 11 a.m., the exam is done. And so we have a process where we go and collect all the exams during that time, and then students can go. It's not so formal with SAS exams because your students are all on different schedules. So there wouldn't really be an official end, except maybe around 10 p.m. when you want all your students to be done. Prior to the exam, if it's not already there, you want to post an exam in progress sign on the door. This is really important if you happen to be waiting or to be writing an exam. Oh, I clicked on something, apologize. If you're writing an exam in a classroom, so basically you find an unlocked classroom in April, students are going to go in it. So it's really good to post an exam in progress sign on the door to make sure that everybody understands that this room is in use and they don't just wander in. And designate your table or your area for your coats, purses, backpacks, phones, drinks, whatever the students will be dropping off that can be administered or monitored by the invigilator. And admit students prior to the exam at least 10 minutes early, but as early as you feel comfortable to start letting them in. And then you can read the examination card aloud. So if the exam is supposed to start at 9 a.m., you want to start reading and getting them settled before that. So we don't start reading the exam card at 9 a.m. and then start the exam after that. We kind of want to line it up so the exam card is read, and then you can say, you know, the time is 9 a.m. You may start. So prior to the exam, for noted that names and accommodation times are not to be posted. All student information is protected by FIPA. So while the exam is in progress, one of the big things is to stay alert, stay aware, and stay moving. So it is not an opportunity to put your earphones in and watch a movie on Netflix. You want to frequently move around the room in random intervals, random patterns, even if you stay seated, to scan the room with your eyes, to, you know, maybe you're looking down for a little bit and sporadically you look up and make sure that students are aware that you are aware. We were really working on students is not cheating by prevention, right? So we want to make sure that we do everything that we can to prevent students the opportunity to cheat. So we're really controlling the activity in the room by moving around the room in random intervals and random patterns. One of the big things that we don't want to do is to make students nervous. So there's a real fine line between us being aware and in control of the room and us being a little bit too diligent on that role and making students nervous. So if you suspect a student is cheating, you might move around the room in sporadic patterns. You might identify the student to the second proctor in the room so that they're aware, so that there can be a second set of eyes. What you don't want to do is sit in the empty table in front of them and like stare down them, right? You don't want to just stay at your desk, move your head in their direction and just stare at them for 10 minutes. So it is still going to be continuous and random because students by nature, when their exams, get nervous, right? We all remember a time when we were under a little bit of pressure and having somebody watch you makes it worse. And so behaviors can be them cheating, definitely. But as soon as a student gets nervous, a lot of times their behaviors become erratic and you think they're cheating. They're not, they're just nervous. So we want to keep it relaxed within the room, but just aware. So very sporadic, trying to make sure that you are aware of all the students and what they're doing without singling out any student at the same time. So during the exam, just a reminder, they can't leave in the first hour of the allowed exam, even if they finished. If a student arrives late, they have 1 hour to arrive late. They cannot be admitted if they're after the hour. And nothing about the exam. The booklets, the exam itself, Scantrons are allowed outside the exam room. The exception to this will be if the student is being escorted to the professor for a question. They'll often bring the exam paper with them so they can like flip and say, I have a question about question 15, and they can bring their booklet and their exam paper with them if they have a question for the professor. Because you're going to be with them the whole way there and the whole way back, and they're not, you know, going to their car and they're not doing anything else. They're just going to ask a question to the prof. So following the exam, verify the student's name, course code, number, and section are on the envelope. Have the student insert the exam and all the materials into the envelope and have them seal it. So this is really important because often over the years, students will say, oh, I handed in 2 booklets, but you only got 1, but I definitely did all the other questions in the second booklet kind of statements. So we now put the responsibility on the student to make sure that everything that the professor requires to be handed back in is in the envelope. So if the professor says you're allowed a cheat sheet, but it has to be returned or put in with the exam information, it's the student's responsibility to make sure everything is in there, the Scantron, the booklets, the cheat sheets, the exam itself needs to be in there. And then ensure that the start and end times are recorded on your information sheet. And then once the exam envelopes have been sealed, they must be signed by all invigilators. Any unused exam booklets must always be returned. So your responsibilities as an invigilator is to ensure that an exam starts and finishes in an orderly and timely manner. You're expected to ensure that the seating arrangements for the students respect the integrity of the exam process. So making sure that there's at least a desk between students and similar exams are separated as much as possible, if they can be. And to maintain the integrity of the exam by monitoring their conduct and acting upon any observed instances of suspected academic misconduct. Checking their photo ID, verifying that the student that writing the exam is the student who is entitled to write the exam. Summon a backup invigilator or security personnel when assistance is required during an emergency, and contact the instructor for clarification of ambiguous aspects of the exam. So a lot of the times the SAS student will be writing at the same time, or at least overlapping the professor's exam. So the professors this year, there is no field house, so all professors are proctoring their own exams within a classroom space. So a lot of the times it will be is that the proctor or the float will take the student and bring them physically to the professor in the classroom, ask their question, and then come back. And then David will speak about what to do if, say, a student is not even writing on the same day as the rest of the class, or has started early, or is ending late, or anything like that. So what to do to find a professor after hours. Invigilators can help students, but making sure that it's not in any way that impinges on the integrity of the exam. So you don't give out answers, even if you know them. You don't help them with questions like, do you know what this word means? Stuff like that. We do want to assist them, but we are not there to answer any questions about the exam. If they do, we bring them to the professor, because the professor knows how much information they want to give the student. We do have professors who write right on their exam, no questions allowed, period. And so we want to respect that. Never leave your students unsupervised, always call for backup. So you should always be in the room with them, at least one person or two. And just make sure you read the cover page of each exam prior to the exam. It's going to let you know, even with or without accommodations for extra time, some exams are only 1 hour, some are 2, some are 3. Some are allowed cheat sheets, some aren't. Even within allowing a cheat sheet, some are, 1 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, single-sided. Some are double-sided. Some are anything you can write in pen, but no computers are allowed. Like, they get very specific. So just make sure you're aware of everything a student is allowed. And then also making sure that prior to the exam start, that what they have on the desk is what they're actually allowed. So if a student is allowed an 8.5 by 11 single-sided cheat sheet, but you go there and you see they're double-sided, then that's something that we need to deal with the professor. So not just being aware of what they are allowed, but also kind of cross-checking and making sure that's actually what they brought. So yeah, the instructor is always the person we're going to contact if we have any questions about the exams. They're the ones who wrote the exams, and they're probably going to be the ones who mark them, so they should answer any questions. And you can contact us if you have any questions, if there's an emergency, if there's something, if you're worried that should we be canceling or can it be allowed to continue. So anything that has anything to do with the regulation side of exams. We do have 2 people that will be on during exams, and we have a hotline that David will share with you. It's our exam hotline. And so we do have staff on. I'm here and Kathy's here as well. So if you have any questions at any point that doesn't really have to do with the SAS side of exams, but more of the regulation or exam side of exams, then let us know. In the event of the fire alarm, Invigilator will do one of 2 things depending on the space. So I know in your testing center, you can secure your own space, is that you can have all the students leave first and then secure your space. If you're in a classroom, that's a little harder because the room can stay unlocked. So if that's the case, if you're in a space you cannot secure as you leave, then you will collect all the exam papers from each student as they exit the room, and you'll hold on to them as you leave the building. So a big reminder is, although you're responsible for upholding the integrity of the exam process, your safety and your student safety is the top priority. So in addition to a safe working environment for yourselves, it's important to ensure that all your students feel safe under your supervision. And if there's anything that makes you feel unable to uphold your position, if you feel like, it all depends on what's going on. So if you don't feel like you can uphold your position, you may contact your immediate supervisor. If something's in the moment feeling unsafe, then you're going to call security. And we make sure that you guys have those numbers as well. Students get stressed, they get nervous, and it's a pretty crazy time, especially in April exams. So December, there's still an edge of hope because the winter term might be where they catch up or where they do better or when they, fix what they did in the fall term. But in April, we find that their mental state can deteriorate just even a little bit more because this is the end of the year. So now if they've had a rough year, this is now built up, and these are like their last chance exams for, say, passing a course, passing their program requirements, graduating. As soon as they finish 1 year, they're aware that there's academic standing, so their ability to continue in their program becomes at risk if they're not doing well. And if they're really stressed out, sometimes it comes out more as aggression than just stress or crying or anything. Not that that's good, but it can turn into a bit more aggressiveness. So just remembering to stay calm, relax, listen to them. You are completely in your right to remind them that you're not going to tolerate offensive or abusive behavior. So taking them aside, if something's going on, listening to what is going on, hearing what they need. But at no point should you be yelled at, sworn at, threatened of any kind. If the behavior continues, so depending on the situation, is to either call your immediate supervisor or security if you feel threatened right away, or if your immediate supervisor isn't nearby, because they'll come and they're trained to deal with situations, escalation situations, so they can chat with students, and at least pulling the student out of the exam to take a breath and take a break is often what they need to. There's an incident report form, and you can give it to your immediate supervisor, who will then forward it to Joel, who is also in the room with us. And then he will process it as well. So if there's an emergency prior to, during, or at the end of the exam, ensure that you and your students are safe. If it's anything to do with a fire, you're obviously going to leave the room. If there's a medical emergency, you can contact security at 8911, and they can come and help with that situation as well. So they are also trained first responders, and so they can help with any medical emergencies that you have. So what if scenarios, Lakehead. So a few of the things like, what do I do if? So they don't have their LU ID, what's the next steps? Some of these are in there because they are technically possibilities, but it's unlikely we're going to do them. Student can retrieve their LU ID card from their car, locker, etc., and return within the first hour exam, but no extra time will be given to write the exam. So hopefully the students are checking in prior to the exam, so they'll know with enough time if they need to go running back to their car. But a lot of times that's not possible, right? If it's at home, if they've lost it, they're not. Yeah, one of our suggestions is they can obtain a replacement LUID card from the Chancellor Patterson Library and return within the first exam, again, without extra time. So the most common thing that we do is that we just verify. So David and Nancy will chat a bit more about how to verify a student, or how they will verify a student, and how they will let you know that that student has been verified. So that's more common, is that we just look them up in the system and we verify them ourselves. So instructor input is required for a question for the exam. If the student knows where the rest of the class is writing, then they can let you know. There's an online timetable as well that is posted at all times. So you can always look it up. I don't know if David, do you identify where the rest of the class is writing on your info sheets?
Yes, in the top left corner for each exam that's at a regularly scheduled date and time, I identify from the exam timetable the particular room that the rest of the class is writing in, and I highlight that information. So yeah, so that's for regularly scheduled exams.
That's good, because most students don't honestly know where the rest of the class is writing, and half the time the rest of the class doesn't even know they're writing. They just kind of tag along with their friends. So you can always check if for any reason it's not included with David. There is no field house this year, so you don't need to worry about it. There's no, at no point would you call the field house, because we don't have one being used this year. So it will all be within a classroom somewhere on campus, and you'll just escort the student directly to the professor, allow them, so the student and the professor should be the ones talking. So here's my question, professor provides the answer. At no point do we want to be a third, like a middleman, in that we ask the professor the question, the professor answers, and then we pass it back to the students. Because there's, I don't know if you've ever seen like the side of or the front of an engineering exam or a physics exam. There's no way I'm ever going to explain that back to a student. So it's best for the student to connect with the professor directly. The only thing that might happen occasionally during SAS exams is while the class is writing, the professor realizes there's a typo on their exam, and that information will filter back to the students who are writing with SAS. So that sometimes is where a middleman is incurred, in that depending on the professor, they may contact 8047, so SAS directly, and then that information will be passed through, written down, and then maybe the floater floats around and tells each student. Sometimes it comes to us and we'll alert you guys. So that's the one time where there could be a little middleman, is that when the professor is correcting one of their own mistakes. So you suspect a student is cheating, or you catch a cheating students, and you have physical proof. So if you're not 100% sure that a student is cheating, make sure you and your co-invigilators are more diligent watching the student. If you're not 100% sure, then we're just going to, monitor the student a little bit more closely, again, without being in their face, on their desk, sitting beside them. We're not doing any of those things. We're just, maybe the frequency of the movements picks up, or maybe a little more sporadic. There's ways to watch a student where they're not actually aware that you're watching them. So sitting slightly behind them and on an angle, you can usually watch them pretty closely without them realizing that you are. So being behind student, but also being aware that you might get focused on this one student who might be cheating. There's still maybe 14 other students who are also aware of your actions. So not stressing out the people maybe that are close to you as you watch the other one. So still just being pretty casual and relaxed. You can stand nearby or beside the student, walk by them a little more frequently, just making the student aware that you are watching them, but not staring them down, not making long periods of eye contact. If you believe there's been a breach, have another invigilator to observe or confirm. If you believe that there has been a breach, there is a document that David will provide. That's the steps to follow in the event of a breach. I won't go through them right now. If the breach entailed a student cheating and there was physical evidence, you may confiscate the proof and follow the steps found on the steps to follow it in the event of a breach. So the offensive, abusive, or irate students, just make sure your safety and the safety of others are maintained at all times. This is kind of a repeat, but reminding them that you will not tolerate the offensive or abusive behavior. You can call security, but you can also call your immediate supervisor. An incident report form should be completed, even just for the opportunity that sometimes I know Nancy might have a discussion with a student after the exams are done, just to chat about their behavior, almost in more of a customer service side of things, see what's going on. You never know what's going on in their lives too, and it could be something that they need an updated accommodation for. So it's always good for people to be aware of. I know people hear incident reports and they think, you know, students going to get expelled, suspended, kicked out, whatever. But sometimes it's a way for us to monitor behavior. And it's also a way for sometimes Nancy to chat with students about what's going on in their lives. I'm done. Okay, so is there any questions?
All right.
Easy peasy.
Thanks very much,
Yeah.
Nikki.
Thanks, Nikki.
Much
Let's see.
appreciate your input into the exam regulation process.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank everybody. We'll see you during exams.
You bet.
Thanks, Nikki.
Okay. So continuing on with the presentation, I'm going to speak towards the invigilation schedules, how we provided those to you, the two different types of invigilation roles that you will be potentially taking on, some of our exam rooms, locations, how to find them. And we'll look in fairly good detail a sample exam information sheet, which lists students, their accommodations, their start and end times, the course codes, instructors, and we'll have a pretty brief overview of the different types of accommodations. So for this year, we tried something a little bit different. We sent out everybody's schedule individualized in a spreadsheet. So you will have received that as I sent it out on Thursday, April the 6th. So what you do is when you find the particular date and report time, you'll see either a green cell or a pink cell. The green would be representative of being a room invigilator, where you're in the room invigilating the students. And a pink cell would be indicative of being a float invigilator. And we'll talk a little bit what some of the roles of a float invigilator are. Now, so the report times, in some particular cases, your report time may be more than a half hour before the scheduled start time. And this is probably when we're utilizing the test center, when we could be nearing full capacity, as the test center is a dual room facility with small rooms inside of one of the rooms. So essentially there are 4 different testing spaces in our test center, which is just past Student Central in the Centennial building. But if I do make any revisions to your schedule, that spreadsheet is a live document. I will make the revisions and I'll do my best to try and notify you by email. Definitely, if I'm adding something or taking something away from somebody's schedule, I will send you an email, but it's always good to have that readily available so you can see if there's any changes that may take place leading up to the exam period and during the exam period. The other thing you'll notice in your spreadsheet is you may see a cell with just an asterisk that's not colored in. That's indicative of you potentially being available based on prior correspondence you provided to us, listing the dates and times that you may be available for. So the good thing to know is that for room invigilators, we're always going to be using experienced SAS invigilators who proctored December or April exams before and have experience on a continual basis invigilating with the SAS office. In a number of situations, we'll have 2 invigilators in a particular room that can be very busy, but there's always float invigilators available to assist in varying tasks and duties. I mean, for starters, when students check in, they'll be checking into the same location that invigilators are reporting to in the main SAS office. We will be checking their Lakehead student ID for verification purposes. Now, as Nikki mentioned, if they don't have their Lakehead student card, then there is protocol to follow. Nancy and I have a lookup procedure where we do verify their ID and provide them something with the Student Accessibility Services stamp and signature from either myself or Nancy, and instruct the student to bring that into the exam room to serve as their identification. But students as well have been reminded in our general emails to bring their Lakehead student card with them. That is the source of identification, checking in with SAS and in the exam room as well when the invigilators are checking the students in there. So float invigilators, usually something that if you're a new invigilator or haven't invigilated before, usually introduce you into the flow of things by having you act as a float invigilator. So you'll be greeting, escorting, or directing students to their exam room. We will be when a student checks in, we will indicate what room they're going to be writing in. And the majority of the rooms that we're going to be using this time are either in close proximity to the SAS office or the test center or Senate chambers, which are in fairly close proximity to one another. In December, we used a room in the Braun building. At this point, we're not using it. I'm using a couple of rooms in the library. There's one in the 5th floor that has good natural light, large tables. I'm using that about 2 or 3 different times. And there's one other room in the basement floor of the library that we will be using once, maybe twice. But in most of the situations, the rooms will be in close proximity to the SAS office, which makes it very handy for students and invigilators themselves to commute from SAS to those exam rooms. Float invigilators as well will go from room to room to, if invigilators in the rooms need a break, washroom break. Some of the invigilation sessions are fairly lengthy. 4.5 to 5 hours could be an average. There may be situations where if you have a double time student, it could be up to 6 hours. So invigilators, if they're by themselves, it's always good to check on them to see if they need a washroom break. Even if there's more than one invigilator in the room, they may need assistance. Like the test center, for instance, when that's at full capacity with the small rooms being used, often we have the float invigilator assist the other 2 invigilators in that space so that we have more eyes on the students who are writing in those smaller spaces as well. Okay. The exam information sheet. So I will give you a screen share of a sample exam information sheet. It does have a lot of the pertinent details noted on that sheet: the course code, the instructor, the date, the start time, the duration, the location of where the students with SAS will be writing. But I also make note of where the rest of the class is writing in the top left and highlight. I retrieve that information from the exam timetable. Now, as Nikki mentioned, there are students who will be writing, if for different types of accommodation reasons, on an alternate date or an alternate start time. In those scenarios, I have requested directly the professor to provide some contact information, and a number of them are providing cell phone numbers. And the law school exams, the law school has provided cell phone numbers for all instructors, as the rest of the class will be writing in the PACI law school building. So we can't really commute there. We do have phone numbers. So I'll stop screen sharing on this one and do, oops. Okay, stop share. I'll pull up a sample exam information sheet here. Okay. So this is a pretty good exam information sheet to utilize for training purposes, as I've selected students with fairly a complex array of accommodations to provide us the opportunity just to see what the coding would look like, what those accommodations mean. So as you can see, I've identified the course code, Psych 1100YA, the instructor's name, the date, and the start time. I intentionally chose an evening exam to further emphasize that the students who are writing evening exams cannot leave after 1 hour of time has elapsed for the start time for the class. So they cannot leave before 7 p.m. for students writing evening exams that are on the scheduled date and time. So that information will also be highlighted at the top of the form. So If you look in the text box, what you'll see are codes for a lot of different types of accommodations. It's a fairly comprehensive list. A lot of students have the DRE, or distraction reduced environment accommodation. We try our best to adhere to a maximum of 15 students in that room. There may be, with the late bookings, we may have a 16th student in a room, a fairly large room, such as the Senate chambers or RC 1001, which is adjacent to the outpost. But a lot of the students do have that accommodation, and we've structured our exam rooms to comfortably fit that many students. As well, there are foam earplugs that will be provided with the exam materials if the student is requesting to use an earplug. Some students may bring their own earplugs. Some students may have an accommodation of noise canceling headphones, and we'll provide those, as they're also in our testing spaces as well. Now, some students have an accommodation where they need to be in a space with a smaller number of students, like the small group 5, so a maximum of 5 students in that room, or students writing in a separate room. And so we do have individualized spaces to accommodate that for students. One of the spaces that we activated during the December exams was our SAS lounge, which is adjacent to my office and adjacent to the SAS office. We have a number of spaces in there that can accommodate separate room and small group 5. So we will be utilizing that space and getting it set up prior to the start of exams. Now, some students have the use of a computer with or without spell grammar check. If that is the case, they'll predominantly be writing in our computer lab, and I'll be providing a flash drive for them or USB for them to save their work as they're typing in Microsoft Word. And then when they're done, well, one of two things could be done. While the experienced invigilators are familiar with the process, we do have one computer in that computer lab that does have a printer attached to it. So if that computer is not being used, the invigilator can take the saved work from the flash drive, transfer it over to that computer and print out. Or they can bring the flash drive to me. I can print out the student's work as well. Ideally, the student is there while this is happening, and they confirm that all their work is printed out, and they would initialize the top of each page. But our SAS invigilators are familiar with this process. Some assistive technology that students might have. The D is for the Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a voice-to-text software program where the student speaks into a microphone and their answers are converted into text. Other students are using Microsoft Word with voice-to-text capability. That I will make note of that as well if it's different from the Dragon Naturally Speaking. Kurzweil Reader, that's a software program where it reads the questions to the student. So we'll have headphones in those spaces where the question paper will have previously been scanned into a program, and it'll have the ability for the student to have those questions read to them, but be in the same space as other students without distraction, as they will have headphones to buffer the sound of the program reading the questions for the students. Some students have the use of music as an accommodation, and we have iPod shuffles available in our test center and one of our other testing spaces for those students who have that accommodation. If they're writing in external spaces, we will ensure that those students have access to those iPod shuffles. A non-programmable calculator would be an accommodation that a student has. Maybe it's not something that's allowed on the exam, but some students have that as an approved accommodation. Not that many students have the scribing and questions read. In fact, I don't think I saw any this particular period where a student is needing scribing or questions being read to them. I would flag that for the invigilator in their exam schedule if that was the case. So from what my recollection is, there isn't any situations like that. There may be students who have that accommodation, but I believe their exams are probably being conducted online at home in a location of their choice. Now, some students do have an accommodation of a memory aid where we use the code MA. This is something that is typically in addition to what the instructor may be providing to the class. It needs to be pre-approved by the instructor. either through the professor's signature on that, on those materials, or if there's an email that was forwarded to me, I will make note that the memory aid has been pre-approved. This does need to be turned in at the end of the exam into the exam envelope as well, just to ensure that the approved memory aid was in fact the one that the student was using, for the professor to confirm that. Other types of accommodations from students who may have mobility issues, the use of a podium or a slant board or supportive chairs. Students with different types of disabilities or medical conditions could require breaks for food, drink, medication, washroom breaks, or just arbitrary breaks where break time is added to the end of the exam. So what we usually instruct our invigilators to do is, in a space near the student's name on the exam information sheet, if the student is taking a pre-approved break, to keep track of the start and the end time, and then to adjust the student's end time accordingly. Similarly, another scenario, as Nikki was discussing, if a student had to leave the space escorted by an invigilator to ask a question to the instructor, that would be another situation where you would stop the clock and keep track of the time that the student had to leave the room, go to the instructor, ask their question, and escorted back to the exam room, in which case you would be keeping track of the student's time away from the exam room so that their end time could be adjusted. In situations where a cell phone is provided by the instructor, that amount of time would be there may be a bit of a delay, in which case sort of keep track of that delayed period of time, but it wouldn't be as along the same measure as a student needing to be escorted to a room. In this case here, Psych 1100 YA, the rest of the class is writing in the upper lecture theater, room UC 2011. But just looking at some of the students here, they're all starting at 5 p.m. except Jane Doe, who has a double time accommodation. As you can see, ET 2 times. So given that this is a 3-hour exam, Jane with double time breaks, use of a podium and a memory aid would have from 3:30 till 9:30 p.m. plus any break time. The other students, they have time and a quarter is 15 additional minutes per hour. I have pre-factored in the calculated time. So if it's a 3-hour exam and the student has 15 additional minutes per hour, John Smith, for instance, they would have 3 hours and 45 minutes to complete the exam. So 5 till 8:45. Some students, well, like Brian Jones, has an array of accommodations, questions read, scribes, separate room, washroom breaks. There isn't any extra time here, but it'll just be 5 to 8 p.m. plus break time added for Brian Jones. Mary has some assistive technology in addition to her time and a third, which is 20 additional minutes per hour. Distraction reduced environment, the Kurzweil reader program, use of a computer with spell grammar check. So I've intentionally chosen an array of students who have fairly complex accommodations. The most prevalent accommodations that you'll see for students writing with SAS are extra time, breaks, and a distraction-reduced environment. So in some particular cases, there could be many students in a given course. Some of the engineering or nursing courses have a lot of students registered with us writing exams on a particular session. And as a result, depending on the accommodations and the number of students, we'll have them writing in different spaces. So what I will be doing in preparation for packaging those exams up, I will highlight all the names of the students who are in a particular room. So I could have, 3 or 4 different rooms being used for a given exam on a particular day. So I'll have to photocopy these exam information sheets and highlight the particular names who will be for the students who will be writing in the different rooms. So not too many students writing Psych 1100 YA, but by and large, the number of students in a particular course will be more than 4. And if it goes beyond 15, I have extra sheets to add names onto. The bottom of the sheet is something that the SAS staff will be attending to when the instructors come to pick up the completed exams. We'll be noting how many they picked up for a particular room, the date. They'll print and sign their name. If you do get the situation that where a professor who wants to pick their exams up from a room, as long as their identification can be verified, and invigilators working with SAS may have had this happen a time or two, that instructor will need to indicate how many exams they're picking up, the date, print their name and sign, and leave behind this exam information sheet for us to file for our records. Okay. All right. Okay, so back to the resumption of the presentation. So those that list of accommodation codes was fairly comprehensive. If there are other types of accommodations that are not in that text box, such as reduced lighting, or some students have the accommodation of use of a scrap piece of paper, I will just hand write that in there. And for those who have the use of a scrap piece of paper, I'm basically going to take some 3-ring binder paper. I'm going to have a stamp for student accessibility services. I'll stamp right on the paper, and I'll include that in the exam packaging to be provided to the student. So anything that's not in that list of accommodation codes, I will hand write that and so that the invigilators have an awareness. I mean, some students have the accommodation of a sit-stand desk, which is kind of an alternative to a podium. We have a number of those desks in some of our testing spaces, so I know some students will be using that. Okay, SAS invigilation rooms. So every room will either be equipped with an exam kit or will be made available to the invigilators. So I have in my exam space where I'm storing all the exams, a number of boxes for all of the rooms that are external to the test center and our secondary space, room RC0007. So inside the exam kits, we'll have important documents such as the instructions that need to be read to invigilators. Nikki talked about instructions in case there's a breach. Those documents as well will be in that in exam kit. Extra stationery supplies, exam booklets, Scantron sheets, they'll also be available in the kits or in our primary exam spaces as well. Some of the other materials referred to in my email inviting everybody to the training session today, I attached a lot of those materials, such as the steps to follow in the event of a breach and our sample irregularity report that we use here at SAS. As well, I've got a number of clocks that will be provided to you if there isn't a clock already in that space. Most of our SAS rooms do have a clock in there, so it would be external spaces that we've booked to accommodate the larger number of exams being written in this 11-day period. So I'll provide clocks as well to be positioned in a room where the students can see the time. And at the test center, I will show you a map of how to get to the test center. If you know how to get to Student Central, you're well on your way to the test center. It's just you're basically going past Student Central. You're going through the Centennial Building doors and making a right, and you're basically there. So I will show you some of the. I'll give you a list of some of the other rooms that we're going to be using. Okay, so this as well was provided in that email I sent to everybody in the invitation for today's training session. Now, the primary rooms that we use throughout the entire term and year are our test center, which I mentioned. It has like 2 semi-large spaces that can accommodate 15 students and some smaller spaces for separate room or small group 5. RC0007 it as well has some small spaces in it. A small room, RC0008, where we could fit maybe 2 students in there if we had to, but it does have a computer in there that could provide assistive technology needs in it. And this is really close to the SAS office. It's right before undergraduate recruitment. And behind the SAS office, we have our computer lab, room SC0009. It has 10 computers in it, where students in there may be using it for typing on Microsoft Word, or some engineering exams that require assistive technology. Our computers have the same technology that the computer labs in the ATAC building have. So I know we have a number of exams that require assistive technology for engineering exams. They will be writing in there as well. And we have the smaller rooms, SC 0007 and SC 0011. They're really advantageous for students who have an accommodation such as voice to text, because they are single rooms and they have computers in them that students can utilize that software of dictating into the microphone and have their work being replicated in Word with voice to text. Our SAS lounge, which we will retrofit leading up to the exams, probably on the 13th, we'll get everything set up. We have a number of small rooms in there, separate rooms, and we'll set up some desks as well in that space in the perimeter of the room, as a lot of the, as we near capacity in some of our other testing rooms, the SAS lounge has been very advantageous, as it was in for the December exams. Some of the external rooms that we will be using, RC 0005, which is right behind the SAS office, adjacent to the washrooms. We will be using that room quite a bit. It does have Wi-Fi in it. So a number of exams, instructors are allowing students to access materials through Wi-Fi. So we'll place the students in a location such as that. The library as well, those spaces have Wi-Fi. The Senate chambers has Wi-Fi. The majority of the law school exams will either be in the Senate chambers or our room RC 0007, as those students will be using their own laptops and require plugins capacities, which the Senate chambers does have a lot of plugins on the desktop, and so does room RC 0007. On the surface of that room near the student desks, there's a compartment that the students can open up, and they can plug in their laptop into that space as well. RC 1001 is adjacent to the outpost, so it's just up the stairs from our office and around the corner. And the Senate chambers, which is as well, it's right across from Student Central, actually. So I'll show you a map of how to get to the test center and the Senate chambers as well. Okay, so map to the test center. Just decrease the size a little bit here. So if you know where Student Central is, and it's in the just across from the Agora Circle, across from the switchboard. To get to the test center, you're following the red arrows, you're making a little bit of a right, then going through the doors of the Centennial Building, and you're basically there. There are washrooms adjacent to the back doors of the two rooms that serve as the test center. And so it's very handy if a student needs to use the washroom, the invigilator, they just have to sort of step outside the back door and ensure that the student is going directly to the washroom and coming back to the testing space where they're going to be writing. It's not identified on this particular diagram, but the Senate chambers itself, it doesn't have a room on the actual door. It's right next to the switchboard. So I will be providing some signage for that to be posted onto that door, room UC 1001, for the duration of the exam period, so that invigilators have an awareness of where that exactly is. But we use the test center throughout the entire term. Our invigilators are very familiar with it. The majority of our students as well are quite familiar with where the test center is. For students writing exams this go around, perhaps they didn't write any midterms and they're only writing their final exams with us. They may not have a familiarity with where the test center is. And one other bit of signage. Now, this sign will give you a feel of where the different test rooms that we will be using are in proximity to the SAS office. So the gold star is the hallway right outside the SAS office. So you can see some direction arrows, which are pathways to some of the different testing rooms. Our lounge is immediately left of the SAS office. My office is actually right next to the lounge, or there's another staff member of ours who is right next to the lounge, and I'm adjacent to the other staff member. So we're right in the same place, basically. Behind the SAS office, SC0009 is our computer lab, and the smaller rooms, SC0011 and SC0007 as well, are in close proximity. RC0005 is a lecture theater. It's going to be in high use this particular go around, as it's very close to our office, and the washrooms are very close to that space as well. And the RC0007 space is down the hall, up you make to get to it from the SAS office. You basically go down the hall and make a right, and it's right before undergraduate recruitment. So that room has basically 3 different testing spaces. The RC000 space as well comfortably can fit 15 students. RC008 has a computer inside of it. We can put 2 students in there if we need to. And there is also a ad hoc space that I created called RC007B that we can use for separate room or small group 5 students as well. So these are all in proximity to the SAS office, which so there's not a lot of time to commute. It's very handy for invigilators escorting to students because it's very close by, and invigilators getting to those rooms. It's very close to our office as well. Okay, back to the presentation. Okay. So a number of select invigilators will be invigilating the law school exams. And at this time, every student who is writing a law school exam will be using a software platform called ExamSoft, where the students, in this particular case, they don't necessarily need Wi-Fi because the students have been instructed to download their exam the night before onto their laptop. There will be some instructions that the students need to follow with passwords to access to open up the exam. And I will be providing that information to everybody once the law school has finalized those details. But we'll primarily be using the Senate chambers and RC0007 for the law school exams. Just a select number of SAS invigilators, ones who have invigilated law school exams in the past for the December exams. But as we're branching away from not strictly using the Senate chambers, we'll be using a second space as a primary space for that as well. So specific instructions I will be providing to everybody once the law school has finalized that data. Other things to make note of when you've finished your exam session. Now, it depends. You could be in an environment where you're in a room where other invigilators are taking over for you. So basically, the rule of thumb is when you have a full, complete set of exams that are finished, bundle them all up in the elastics that I provided to you. And if it's during office hours, you can provide them, you can deliver those completed exams back to my office. If it's outside of office hours, I know that we're going to have some staffing during the weekdays until probably 7 p.m.-ish, thereabouts. But if it goes beyond 7 p.m. on a weekday, or if it's on the weekend and we don't have staffing, I have notified security of a protocol to follow, which basically you'd go to security, indicates you're invigilating with SAS. You need access into a room that's inside my room, and there's a blue bin that says place completed exams here. So security would be ensuring that you drop the exams off and that room gets locked, my office gets locked, and we'll utilize that process as well. I think I'll probably cut and paste that email that I sent to security recently to resend it to everybody again for reinforcement of that procedure. But if we have SAS staff after 4:30, you can provide it to probably Nancy, who will be working outside beyond the 4:30 on weekdays till 7 p.m. potentially. But I will be I'm going to be taking a different lunchtime to ensure that I am available for the 1 p.m. exam. So my lunches are going to be 11 a.m. to 12 noon. Other staff may be adjusting their lunches as well, but I know I have adjusted my lunchtime for 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. throughout the duration of the exam period. So I will not be in my office from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Otherwise, during office hours, I will be in my office. Okay. I believe that's the end of our slides for the presentation. Does anybody have any other questions at this time?
Cheryl?
Yeah, I was just wondering, so if we are going to be afloat or if we are going to be in a classroom, where do we start our times? Like, do we check in at SAS? Is that what we do just to get started, and then we'll get all the stuff we need there?
Yeah, always check in, always report to SAS. Now, if you're going to be a float invigilator, what I will be providing to the float invigilators for a given day is a list of all the different rooms that are going to be used for each session. And I'm trying to be accurate with this number of students that are going to be in that room, but it'll have the invigilators, just their first names, that are working in those particular rooms. And so the float invigilators, I'll provide it to them in a binder so that they have an awareness of what rooms are actively being used. So the float invigilators will assist invigilators in those rooms if need be, provide them washroom breaks, escort students to those rooms. So that is something that we routinely provide to float invigilators. If you're a room invigilator, you check into SAS. I will provide the materials to those room invigilators. They will head out to the rooms to get set up as soon as possible. And we will utilize our float invigilators to have the students directed or escorted to the actual rooms themselves.
And then just one more question. So for example, if we are escorting a student for a bathroom break, our responsibility is to escort them to the bathroom. But I just want to confirm, like, we don't go in, we don't do anything like that. I'm assuming that. I just want to make it really clear.
No, you don't go in. You just, just standing out in the hall. You're just going to make sure they go to the they get to the bathroom, and then you'll walk back down to the room with them once they leave the bathroom. Yeah. We're not going. We don't go in. We're just making sure they're going to the bathroom and then going back to the classroom. Similar to students who have disability related breaks. Some students may take their breaks and they may stay right in their desks, turn over their test paper, stay in their desk and take their disability related break. But some students need to stand up and go out of the room. So a float invigilator may be there to help, you're there to supervise those students while they're outside of the room. They're not, they could be walking in a hall, they could be sitting outside in a chair out in the hall. But they're, typically you're supervising that student, so they're not chatting with anybody, ensuring that they're to ensure academic integrity, right?
Yeah, and we've emailed students to indicate if they need to take a break as one of their approved accommodations to raise their hand or get the invigilator's attention, indicating I'd like to take my break right now, be it an arbitrary break to stand, stretch, and move, or an approved washroom break, or a break for food, drink, and medication. So the invigilators have an awareness of, okay, this student has this approved accommodation of break time added. The student may, as Nancy mentioned, they can't be viewing their test paper while they're taking a break. I remember invigilating a long time ago that a student didn't move from their desk, and after 4 hours or so, when time was basically up, they said, well, I was taking breaks throughout the exam, but they hadn't left their desk. They haven't notified me. So that's not really the type of break that we can, authorize. They need to step away from the exam paper, not view it, and continue processing information. So they may just stand, stretch, move, they may walk for a short period of time in the vicinity of the exam room, as long as the invigilator has them in their proximity to ensure that they're being monitored, and then going back to their seat and resuming the exam.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Good question. Melanie?
So if we're assigned as a room invigilator, will we know our rooms in advance, or will you just let us know when we come to check in?
Yeah, that'll be at check-in as
Okay.
with different late bookings by students for exams. It's almost like musical chairs in some cases where I'm flipping rooms depending on the accommodation needs or the format of the exam. So it's nearly impossible for me to provide the rooms to invigilators in advance. So you'll get that information. Basically, I'm going to have a sticky note with the invigilators' first names and the room. I'll hand you the package. The invigilators will go to the rooms and get set up and wait for the students to arrive and sort of take it from there.
And in that same way, sometimes, if we have if there could we may be short an invigilator, your assignment might change. We might have to make some changes on the day of, depending what's going on. Sometimes if someone's not well and not able to attend the session, we may have to pull a float invigilator to join somebody in a room somewhere, depending on what we what we have, what happens. So it can change. You will be close, like one of the rooms that David talked about, close to SAS. So the best thing is to come here to our office, our main office, and I'll be checking. We give all the invigilators their all they need first, and then we start checking in students. So yeah.
So
Okay, thank you.
if the role of an invigilator changed from float to room invigilator, I would make that adjustment in the spreadsheet. So you would see the color change from pink to green. And I would insert that invigilator into, they would be with an experienced SAS invigilator. Anybody who's new to this is going to be with an experienced SAS invigilator. That's always a rule of thumb that we do follow here. We don't want a brand new invigilator in a room of 15 students. That's not typically how we would like to manage the invigilation process.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Joel?
Yeah, I think you sort of answered my question there, David. I saw that I'm slotted in as a room invigilator, and I couldn't remember whether you said that room invigilators were more experienced. And I'm like, I haven't done this.
Don't worry.
No, you will be with somebody, Joel, who has done this. So yeah, basically take your cues from the experienced SAS invigilator.
Yeah.
It's probably not the test center. I'd have to see your schedule to see exactly what room we would have you working.
But most of our experienced invigilators have been, through an exam session. And so they're familiar with, seating plans. And we do have templates for seating plans as well that the invigilators use to determine where, best spots for students to sit. And so our experienced invigilators, they're familiar with that process and are there to, really support, the new invigilators with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All of the exam kits have a time tracking sheet where the invigilator can make note of the student, their start, their end time, when to give a 10-minute remainder, 10-minute warning announcement. That's what our experienced invigilators usually like to do, like indicate that a student has 10 minutes remaining in their exam. They'll discreetly go up to the student. They may just go, flash, two hands, like 10 minutes remaining as quietly and discreetly as possible. In most cases, there will be a clock in the room so that the students can see to be able to follow the time and manage their time accordingly while they're writing the exam, or we'll provide one.
Okay. So there always is, when we're talking about students having, a break as an accommodation and being able to leave the space, being supervised, there's always at least 2 invigilators so someone can keep an eye on that one person. And then I guess if there's multiple breaks being requested at approximately the same time, then you have to call on floats and things like that, or?
Yeah.
A situation like a washroom break scenario, it'd be one student at a time if it's washroom break, because you're not going into the washroom with the student, you're just ensuring that they are going to the washroom and returning. And similarly, if a student needs to take a break outside of the testing space, that would be something ideally one student at a time, but some may just be taking breaks, getting up, standing and stretching away from their desk without distracting other students. That's something, invigilators who work with SAS throughout the year, the term, and the different December and April exam sessions could probably speak to what is the likelihood of students taking breaks at the same time. If I was to review exam information sheets to see the breakage and do an analysis of that. It very well could happen that there could be simultaneous breaks required by students, just arbitrary breaks as required, breaks to stand, stretch, and move. But if it's washroom, yeah, that's one at a time.
Yeah. And they need to be they need to be supervised. So Joel, like if a student requested to, take a disability related break and, you're with another person in the room and one invigilator was out on washroom break, you'd have to call one of the float invigilators. That's where that float invigilator is helpful, that we have on hand, because they can go around to the different areas and help out, when needed. So, yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? And everybody could view their schedule okay? Everybody got their schedule okay? Any questions, let us know about the schedule. David, just shoot David an email and he can, help if you need anything. And
So I guess, like you said, David, your time to start or report to the SAS office, but you don't necessarily know your exact end time because you don't know.
It's if you're a float invigilator, there's a little more precision involved in that, because the float invigilators, they have other float invigilators taking over for them, like the afternoon floats take over for the morning float. So you can pretty much say 8:30 to 12:30-ish. So if you were a float invigilator in the morning, you would bring back the float binder, as we call it, to SAS, hand
at
it, and
12:30.
we would provide it to the 12:30 float invigilator.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you're an afternoon float invigilator, you would come back to SAS at 4:30, and we would give that binder to the next float invigilator. If you're an evening float invigilator, it's kind of a play it by ear. You may be there for maybe only required maybe till 8 p.m. It kind of depends on
depends on numbers.
How busy the evening is.
Yeah.
If it's a really busy evening with the test center at near capacity, once those numbers start to dwindle down, the float invigilator may be able to leave, but they're like Nancy can probably speak to how late some float invigilators are hanging around in the evening shifts.
Yeah, it was usually around 8 o'clock, depending, but then, depending on the numbers, some, and the numbers we had in some of our rooms, it may have been at the latest, I think 9 o'clock, if it was a really busy evening, but typically around 8 o'clock. I know some invigilators, they would do that last final sweep, and then by 8 o'clock, the numbers were so low that invigilators in the room could were there if a student, if there was any concerns or issues, there was invigilators there. Thanks, Cheryl. We were all finished here anyway. Thanks so much for coming.
Okay, thanks for attending, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And let us know if you have any questions, and we're happy to answer them anytime. Okay. Great,
Okay.
thanks.
I'll end the recording now.
Yeah, okay.